Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Performance Assurance Dashboards post-go live drop-in session. My name is Amy. I'm on the right-hand side of the screen just there. I work on the communications team for the Rec Code Manager, and I will be facilitating today's session. I have joining me today colleagues from across the Rec Code Manager team. So just to kick us off, a few bits of housekeeping. This session is being recorded today, and the recording and slides for this event will be made available on the Rec portal next week. If everyone could please keep their microphones and cameras off unless they're speaking, it would be greatly appreciated. In order to take your questions during the session today, we're using Slido, and you can access this via the QR code that's now on screen. If you have a smartphone, you can scan this QR code using your camera app, or you can type the number on screen into slido.com on your web browser. Alternatively, if you're using the desktop app for Teams, you'll be able to see an S at the top of this call where you can click and access Slido through there as well. Please feel free to raise your questions as they come to you throughout the session. We will have a designated Q&A section. And yeah, I will now pass over to my colleague, Andrew. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Hey, everybody. Nice to see people, or little circles of people, given the camera rules. So this is really an opportunity. We set it up just so that people had a bit of an initial kind of touch point drop in to say, you know, I've got an immediate question on dashboards, so forth and so on. We did go live with Party Dashboards yesterday. Service providers unfortunately hasn't gone live just yet, but should be going live shortly. I'm hoping later today, but we'll be confirming that, and there'll be comms out to confirm both of those once they're both up and running. So I think probably we will do some additional post go live activity once people have had a little bit more time to log on and poke buttons and try things and therefore find they have more questions. And what we're probably going to do on that is we'll see what sort of questions we get both today but also over the next week or two from parties to work out whether a webinar is the right form for that, and that will be true if the questions we're getting are fairly consistent and are things we can answer without talking about like your specific data, or if the questions we're getting require a conversation about data specific to the individual party, where a webinar is obviously not going to be the right answer, because clearly talking about somebody's data in front of everybody is not the right answer. So whether we'll go with another webinar, whether we'll go with something slightly different, will kind of depend on the sorts of questions and queries we get. So, but we'll obviously communicate that through with you guys. What I thought I would just do as a quick précis is a quick recap on what's available and where it is, and then we'll basically open it up to the floor, as it were. And if you've got particular questions that you want to ask, they might be about the dashboards, they might also be about the communications that went out yesterday, just confirming to everybody where the dashboards were, and that might be raising questions. And we've had a number of people come back on that, either confirming or raising a query about that, just in terms of where you are in terms of the portal pages and so forth. So but we'll open it up, we'll take as many questions as there are, and then we'll see whether once people have been through and asked anything they want to ask, then we'll sort of draw things to a close. But we've got 2 hours if we need it. I suspect we probably won't, but that really depends on you guys in terms of questions that you've got. So just as a quick reminder, and those who were on previous webinars, and I'm afraid my remembrance of exactly who joined every webinar is not good enough to work out whether all the same names are here or not. But just as a quick reminder, on the screen at the moment is a list of the tabs that as a party you will see. So the first 3 covering risk related measures, so to do with the retail risk catalogue, and the other 4 more specific elements of performance assurance activity in particular areas, largely as labelled. So be specific topic monitoring covering meter ops, peer comparison being any peer comparison stats that we're applying currently used for erroneous switches, Smith survey and theft being largely what they say on the tin. One thing I will mention actually just on the peer comparison is that the peer comparison or the area that peer comparison is applied to at the moment is in relation to erroneous switches, so for suppliers, and looks at effectively your rate of erroneous switches relative to overall switch activity volumes. We produce that on a sort of rolling 3-month average basis. And due to the change from obviously the legacy switching arrangements to CSS, there is a slight change in the data that's available to measure that. Obviously, the processes themselves have changed. So the first 3-month rolling period won't be available until slightly later this month. And as a result, if you do go in and you sort of say, well, I've only got data up until June, that's why on peer comparison. So just if anybody had already been very on the ball and spotted that, just to preempt that question. For service providers, I don't actually think we've got the slide in here, but if you are a service provider, then you will see essentially 2 tabs, one with your qualitative service provider measures in and one with your quantitative in. And for if there are any parties on who are both a service provider and a party, then you'll have two dashboard tabs that you have visible to you. So one with the service provider information and one with your information as a party in terms of performance assurance. If we can go on to the next slide. So again, covered this before, and again, we can show people this if they're not sure. Oh, I've just spotted there's actually an error on that slide, so we'll get that corrected before we issue them out. So the first 3 tabs, you only see your own data. Ignore what it says there, other party data are anonymized. That must be a slightly out of date slide. Apologies for that. So the first 3 tabs, you just see your data as a party, and for all other tabs, you see your own data and you see other party data, other parties being anonymized. If you have a particular tab that does not apply to you, so let's use perhaps the easiest example, which would be the SMIS survey. Let's say maybe you do SMIS surveys, but you're only a domestic installer. You will still be able to see the micro business SMIS survey, but because you don't have any data in it, all of the parties will be anonymized. So obviously you won't have your own party row because it doesn't apply to you. And the way that displays across all of the various visuals is your party name or parties, if you've got more than one party, will be in the kind of the blue highlight as shown by the test supplier 319 there, and every other party will look like a party and then a number, and display in that way. So just as a reminder of how that works, or if you didn't join the previous webinar, information on how that works. And then if we just go to the next slide, which I think is basically the final slide, just a quick reminder, to access the dashboards, you need to have this new role that's been set up in the portal, which is the Performance Assurance Dashboard Viewer. There is just a slight issue with that showing up literally this morning, which we've got a P1 raised on at the moment. So we're just waiting for the portal team to just investigate why that's not showing up to be allocated. Which obviously makes it hard to allocate it. But as soon as that's resolved, you'll be able to go in and assign yourself that role. If you are the MAU or contract manager for your organisation, or ask your colleague who is the MAU or contract manager if not. If you're not sure who your MAU or your contract manager is, then best thing to do is to either speak to your OAM, if you know who that is, or to just drop a line to the help desk and they'll be able to point you in the right direction. So a couple of different ways you can get to that, but it's important to note that you do need to have that role before you'll be able to access the dashboards. The other thing that you do need to do, as I referred to before, so if you are a party, so this doesn't apply for service providers, but for a party, we have sent out individual mails to every party yesterday, effectively saying, and that went to your contract manager, saying this is the particular location you'll go to for your dashboards, and it just explains whether we have you recorded as being a grouped party or a not grouped party. So a grouped party is the scenario where you have more than one rec party in your corporate group. So typically applies to organisations that, for example, have different legal entities for their gas and power supply businesses, or where you've kind of over time built out a corporate business through acquisition. You're able to say, yes, I would like to be grouped, or no, I wouldn't. If you're not grouped, which is the default, then the data is at a party level and viewed by party, so it'll be on a party site. If you are grouped, then there is a group site where the dashboard will appear, and then you'll see the data for all your parties in that one dashboard. So we've mailed out everybody to effectively say, this is where that location is in your particular circumstance, and we've asked you to confirm back that that reflects your understanding and is sort of correct. If you go and access the dashboards before you've given us that confirmation, you will still see a dashboard. It will still be there, but you won't see any party specific data. So the first 3 tabs that we talked about before will just appear with no data in. So the structure will be there, the graphs and the tables and things will be there, but there'll be no data to display because we haven't granted it you yet. And the remaining 4 tabs will show anonymous data only. They won't show your row. So your row might be in there, but you won't know it's you. Once you give us that confirmation, we're doing like a process at the end of each day. So if you come back and confirm by 5 p.m, that'll then go overnight into a refresh, and then the following day you'll be able to go in and have a look at your dashboards. So just a kind of a run through of how that process works. That was everything I had slide wise. We can pull up the dashboards in the test environment if anybody's got specific questions, so we'll do that if that suits the questions that people have. But at this point I would open it up to questions and effectively say, please, if you've got questions, this is very much a drop-in session. So again, if you've got a question and it's answered and then you want to drop away, you're welcome to. If you want to stay and listen in case other people have got questions that are relevant to you as well, of course you're welcome to do that as well. But this is very much for as much or as little time as you guys need to ask questions of us, really. So I see a hand has gone up, and then also I was going to say we've got the Slido sort of option as well. So just as a reminder, if you go to Slido, thanks Amy for putting that up on the screen, you can submit questions there, or do as let me just see who's put their hand up. Heather has done, and just pop your hand up and we'll just sort of take questions as they come through. So I'm just going to pull up the Slido list now, so if there are any on there. Heather, do you want to jump in with your question?
Yeah, sorry, did you say you were sharing you'll be able to share your slides?
So the slides from this will be shared. They're basically the same as was on the webinars that were run.
Oh, that's absolutely fine. Sorry, I missed that bit. I think I must got a bit late. Thank you very much.
That's not a problem at all. If you didn't manage to join webinars last week, we ran webinars and the recordings for those are available on the
No,
board.
I didn't.
Yeah. We ran one for parties, one for service providers. So if you weren't able to join those, or you want to get a recap or remind yourself or whatever it is, then please take advantage of those recordings.
Thank you very much.
Is it up to parties to make sure we are signed up under the new role? So yeah. So in terms of the role. So we've not assigned that role to anybody in an organisation by default, because obviously we're not sure who would want that role depending on your organisational specific context. So obviously, assuming you've already got a portal account, let's assume that's true, you'll obviously have access already to your general party operations area. The difference is, we can show the screen in a second if it's useful, but the difference is until you've got that role, then you won't see the dashboard button or tab. So and sort of assigning that role sits with the by default the MAU for each organisation. That's the master admin user. Sorry to use the acronym there. So every organisation essentially has the ability to manage its own users' access within the portal. So that would be the first place to go to get that assigned. And the thinking there really is that it may be that you have different scenarios as to who you want to access the dashboard compared to, for example, who's engaged in uploading the data for performance assurance or engaging in other aspects on the portal. So it gives you that ability to control the access as you see best. Hopefully that answers that. Rachel.
Yeah, just to clarify on the you mentioned there's an issue right now that will hopefully be resolved quite quickly.
Yes, I hope
signing.
The signing the role, yes.
does that mean that no one has access just right now, or contract managers should have access provided they responded to their email?
No, you won't have access until that's gone in, just because the way that issue is pervading, we've actually essentially just paused the dashboard availability just while that gets resolved.
Okay. Okay.
Obviously, we're quite sensitive to the security around getting this right, so we just want to make sure that gets sorted. So I'm hoping that will literally get resolved, kind of during the next couple of hours. It might even happen talking on the webinar. But and the reason, therefore, you've not seen the comms go out saying dashboards are there, have at them, is because we just want to solve that before we send that email out. So as soon as you see that, that will also indicate that that's been resolved as well. So if you can just bear with us on that, please, we'll get it sorted.
Perfect. That's clear. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for the question. So when is the first publication? So subject to this role thing being organised on the party dashboards, that will be today, or as soon as that's resolved. If it's not today, those dashboards will contain data. So just as a reminder for everybody, the sort of timing of things. So it's November it's November this month, for example. So at the beginning of November, data for the performance period, sort of a month and a day behind. So for September is collected. That includes obviously data that parties provide, but also from other sources. That gets processed at the beginning part of November. It goes through some review and validation, including we will occasionally spot things in that data that tell us, okay, actually we're going to hold publication, but if we ever do that, we'll obviously make sure people are aware. And then the timing will be that at PAB paper publication day, which is a week before the PAB, so essentially the PAB is on the last Tuesday of the month, so the second last Tuesday of the month, the data will get refreshed in the dashboard. So as of today, had we not had this slight issue with the role, technically the data's there, but you can't see it because you've got the role. The data is up till August because we haven't released September. On Tuesday, which is PAB paper day, we will release the September performance assurance data. Next month it will be the October performance assurance data, and then so on and so forth. So it very much aligns with essentially the data that you submit as a party, although obviously there's other data than the data you submit that feeds those dashboards. But that's the sort of the sequencing. We'll be sending out notifications as the data becomes available, and we'll also, as I say, if we do ever have a circumstance where we need to hold back some data because we think there's a problem with it, we'll also be clear about that. One of the things that's on these are version 1 obviously dashboards, so we'll be kind of looking at continuous improvement, of course. One of the things I think we have on the list on that will be we might put a sort of a rolling front sheet on the front with almost like release notes, so that if you haven't seen the email, it's still just very clear, like we've held this data out this month, for example, or there's this known issue with this particular measure, so just be aware. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question on the first publication, which was at the top of the screen when I started answering it, but it seems to have changed order. I think because somebody's liked the other one. So I think we've answered that one. Another drop-in session with the dashboard is live. Yes. And the intention was that was today. As I say, we've got a slight issue this morning with the on the portal technical side that the team are looking at the moment. I'm happy to do another drop-in session. The one thing we thought would just be useful would be to see you know, because obviously we need to organise that and give people sufficient notice, is if we start to see all of the queries we get are like, we need to do bilaterally. A webinar is obviously not helpful for that. But we'll, so I think we'll probably see this early next week as to what sort of queries we're getting. If it's clear another drop-in session is useful, yes, of course, we'd be very happy to have another one. And I think we'll have a number of engagements over the next few months on dashboards, because there's engagement on the dashboards, but I think more importantly, what I'm hoping we'll see is more and more engagement on the data in the dashboards, and what does it mean, and what does that tell us about performance, and what's going on in the market, and, you know, all of those sorts of things. So, you know, this is the start, not the end, I would suggest. Overall score dashboard, yeah, can do. I might ask my colleague James just to bring up the actual dashboard from the test environment while I talk through this, just so that people are familiar with what somebody means by the overall score on the 2 axes. So this is test data. So just to explain, just to mention, but just to explain. So this dashboard, this is what a party sees on this dashboard. Just to mention, there is a variant of this that the PAB see, which is basically the same, except for the fact that they see every party. So they'll see a circle on the sort of heat map, but they'll see that for every party. And obviously that the idea there is it's a sort of a sense of you know, kind of where there might need to be more or less interest from the PAB in terms of a particular party. So the primary reason we are making this dashboard available to parties is because obviously if the PAB's saying something about you, we want you to be able to see what the PAB sees about you, and so, you know, we want you to have access to that, and be able to sort of see that, and therefore if you've got questions on it, or you think something doesn't quite look right, or you want to understand why you are where you are, you've got that ability to obviously raise that as well. So just to talk you through the dashboard here briefly. So the big thing is the heat map on the left, and I think that was what the question was. So we've got a series of dots essentially just over time, so you can see kind of where you've been. In this example, the test data is through till June 22, so the current data is the one up in the little orange box there. On the y-axis, is your highest score. So each risk is measured based on whatever the particular criteria might be. So let's use an example. When you have a prepayment meter, so maybe not applicable to everybody, but if you have a prepayment meter that's switching but there's debt on the meter, you can have a debt assignment plan to allow the switch to go ahead but the debt to be transferred across. That requires you to complete that within a certain time scale. We have a particular risk we measure around that, which is around is it being completed timely. So our population of things we're measuring is all the switches with a DAP applied. We then have a minor. In the language we use, it's a bit like a sort of driving test. So you've got a minor and a major. So in a minor, in that particular circumstance, then that is where the process was completed, but behind the schedule. So as in it was didn't complete per the time frames. So you score a 1. And for a major, which is that you haven't completed it and the time frame for that has passed, so it's not been resolved, you are a major, and a major scores a 5. So the idea is obviously there's a weighting, and we effectively total up all the majors, all the minors, and we divide that into the number of possible events that happened for you as a particular party, and that gives you your normalized score. And that's the same across all risks or all risk drivers. Obviously the definition of what each one is different, and you can see that in the more detailed dashboards as well as in the retail risk register. We then take all of that data and we say, okay, across all of the different risks that we've measured for a particular party, what was your highest score? So for which risk did you have the highest number? And highest in that case indicates obviously a sort of an example I use, for example, a sort of non-compliance. Then the x-axis uses, and again, we ran a separate webinar on threshold setting, which I think we can share the recording to, but as a brief summary, the PAB sets thresholds for each of those risks, and the underlying risk drivers actually is the level they're set at. So they set a threshold using kind of 3 levers. So one is that score, one is a time period or a trend period. So I'll give an example in a second. And the third is a sort of minimum level of activity. So those, you can think about thresholds as being the score has to be over a certain level for a certain time period, and there needs to be at least a certain number of events occurring. So to go back to my example of the debt assignment protocol, and I don't off the top of my head know what the threshold is, but let's just say, for example, it might be that the score is over 0.25, so roughly a quarter of the DAPs in that scenario wouldn't be being completed on time for 3 months, with at least 50 activities a month. So what that's essentially saying is you've consistently been above that level for 3 months, and you're doing a volume that's more than a sort of de minimis type level. The idea obviously of that is to avoid kind of very spiky behavior. If you're literally doing a process once or twice, we don't want to kind of overreact to that. So the PAB thresholds are used by the PAB to effectively tell us as the code manager, like, this is the level of activity that we want you to positively intervene against. So we may intervene when things are not above threshold, but if something is above threshold, we have to explain to the PAB what we're doing about that. So it's a sort of way of directing behavior. And the x-axis is measured based on, of all of the risks that have a threshold set. There are a few that don't, particularly some of the new CSS ones, because we need a bit of data to help do that. So as in, we need a bit of time to do that, I should say. But for those where we have a threshold, what percentage of them were over that threshold, and that sets where you are on the x-axis, and then obviously that gives you a point on the chart. I saw a question come in terms of what does the PAB see, and we can show you in the demo version what the PAB sees, because I don't think there's any problem with doing that. But in summary, the PAB by default sees the latest month. So in this scenario, we've got, you know, a history. The PAB for this party would see that June dot, and then the June dot for every other party, and then they can obviously filter it to say, well, actually, I want to just look at suppliers, or I just want to look at DNOs, or I want to look at MEMS, or I want to look at just non-domestic suppliers. You know, they can slice it down, obviously. They can drill through and effectively see this view. So if they've then said, okay, there's something interesting going on with this particular party, they would then be able to see this type of view with the time, which I think would be primarily of relevance to say, is this, you know, 1 month that's a bit anomalous, or is it, you know, several months now of, for example, being in, you know, let's say the orange bit. Okay, that's potentially more interesting. Just to finish off while we're tracking through this, in case this is useful, the bottom right table just has some sort of contextual type information. Again, all the data there is kind of dummy data for the demo, but some of it is kind of more just kind of contextual facts. So, you know, what market role do you have? In this case, this parties have got a couple of roles. You know, what you know, if you're a supplier, are you a domestic or you know, non-domestic type supplier, etc. And then also some information on things like, are you in CME, or you know, have you done your most recent maintenance of qualification process? So there's some sort of rec process compliance type things within that, because some of those things are more or less frequently changed. So you know, MOQ is, for example, an annual process, so you know, you either did it on time or not that year. That last updated column is then gives us an idea of the you know, kind of the recency of the data. Again, this is all test data, so don't read anything into the dates or anything. But the idea is that just gives, when you're looking at this, a bit more context. And it's basically a bunch of data items that PAB members will often request when they're asking about a particular party. So again, we put it in there so that PAB members can see it, but also you can see it. And obviously, if you think that looks, you know, wrong, then clearly you can kind of come and say, well, you know, you're saying we're in CME, we're not in CME, what are you talking about, or whatever it might be, and obviously we can sort of investigate that with you. So that's the idea. That was probably quite a long answer to maybe a short question, but I hope that was useful. The RAG status, it doesn't have a strict definition, no, it's just more a visual kind of way of looking at that kind of XY scatter. So it's not, amber means X will certainly happen, or kind of yellow means this. It's just a visual guide on the chart. Clearly, if you were kind of in the red, what that's really saying is your, pretty much all of your performance data is showing that you're outside of the PABS thresholds, and that you've got lots of scores that are very high, which would tend to indicate that lots of non-compliance with items in the compliance-based risks. So there's a sort of natural certain amount, I guess, of indication with a RAG status, but it's not a defined thing. This is just a visual aid really for when the graph is being used. I hope that was useful. Answered the question.
Thanks, Andrew. We've not had any other questions come in at the moment. Shall I share my slides again, just so that we've got the QR code
Yeah,
in case people who are late joining?
Yeah, perfect. That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, bear with me while I just get that up.
If it's helpful to demo anything. I think we've had a few people, looks like I've had a few people drop away as well, so which is fine. That's the idea of a drop in, ask what you need to drop out.
So hopefully everyone can see the QR code on screen now. So if you were late joining us, you can submit any questions that you may have via Slido by scanning the QR code that's on the screen, or typing in the number on screen into slido.com in your web browser. This is a drop-in session, so we'll be taking questions throughout. Just submit them as and when they come to you.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. Historically, that was based on DTN data, and I'm just going to pull up a spreadsheet and try and grab the particular deflows while I'm talking. But effectively, it measured it based on once an erroneous switch was accepted, we would then look at that as being the that would be the top of the fraction in a given month, and then we would look at total switch requests in the month, and that would be the that would be what we divide into. That was based on and if you do, I should say more generally actually, if you do have a question on like specifically where a particular data item comes from, all the data that feeds the dashboards is all the data that's specified in the park. So for example, for the Electrolink source data, which covers the data that comes off the DTN, that's all defined right down to the level of which deflows and so forth are used. So if you do want to go and look at a specific thing, which of course you might want to if you see a number and you think that doesn't look like what I think our performance is, I want to understand that, then that's a good place to go look. Post CSS Go Live, we get reporting from the central switching service, which tells us effectively every erroneous switch that every switch that's flagged as an erroneous switch through the processes there. And then we have a slightly different measure, which is we have the number of successful switches rather than the number of switch requests, just the data that's available in the current reporting to us. So the measure is slightly different. So previously it was accepted erroneous over total switch requests. Now it's erroneous switches over completed switches, which is obviously a slightly different measure, which is why we're not just rolling the average over, because they are slightly different. But that's what that's based on. So hopefully that answers the ET question? If not, throw your hand back up, or Phil, you put your name on it. So Phil, shout if that hasn't answered your questions. Oh yeah, you hands up. So go.
Yeah, thanks for explaining. I suppose my thought process is just around the what's considered a true ET and what's considered using the ET process as a goodwill gesture, and also is it post FMRS, are we not taking the ET flows into consideration, and actually we're now using CSS for the ET true flag in the registration order?
So in terms of how ETs are being used, I mean, obviously you can only see so much in the data. It's important to note, like with the peer comparison, and as was the case under both the pre-CSS rec regime and obviously previously under the ET PAB, it's an indication, as opposed to, it is not the case that the target is necessarily that you should never have an ET, right? I mean, in some ways you could argue that'd be a perfect world, but let's work in the real world for a second. What we're really looking at is how are different how is behavior different or the same across the market. So there's a certain amount of kind of, obviously you've got to use the data that's available. We are using CSS now, not the flows. Yes, that's correct. Sorry, I'm not sure if that was quite your question, Phil.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I suppose the ET flows would be out of scope if you're relying solely on CSS. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so we switched over since CSS go live to that as a new measure. So we've essentially retired the old measure and brought in this new measure. So I hope that answers it. But I might actually just take the second question that's showing on the screen first, because it probably is a sort of nice natural follow-on from your question there, Phil, and then I'll come back to the first one in a second. So in terms of querying the data, yes, and as I think I said in some of the previous webinars, one of the principles that we're keen to do with the dashboards is you should see what we see, and the purpose of that is a fewfold. One is obviously if we're coming and asking you about something, it's just logistically simple. If we can say it's there, you've got access to the information. Hopefully over time it also gives you a better appreciation of why we are doing certain things or not doing certain things. But also, yeah, absolutely, if you see something that doesn't to you seem to correlate with what your own internal monitoring is telling you, or your kind of perception of performance in a particular area, we would definitely kind of want you to say to us, like, that we don't necessarily think this looks right. And there's a number of reasons why that might be, right? So we're obviously collecting data from a variety of sources. I mentioned we do go through processes to obviously try and make sure that data is valid, and sort of doesn't have any gremlins in it. But occasionally, it might look right, but it doesn't mean it is right. So it may be that there is something there that isn't quite right, and we need to sort of get into that. The second is we've got a set of data coming in. As I say, we've got a set of measures that we've defined. Those are all kind of out there in the retail risk register. It may be that kind of what we're measuring isn't capturing every scenario. There's something that's happening that means we're creating a false positive, for example, or whatever it might be. So if you see something that you think looks odd, engage with us. Let's work it out. And it might be that we need to make a change to one of our measures, enhance a measure, bring in an additional measure, whatever it might be. So we get the sort of the collective group thing from that. But it may be that the data in the underlying data set is wrong. Now, in that case, it might be that yes, the data is wrong, but that means it's wrong, for example, in an industry flow or an industry system. So it's right for us to monitor it, but then the resolution path might be slightly different. Or there could just be other sources of error or whatever it might be, or it might inform that you think it looks wrong, and actually by engaging we work out that the information we had was correct and actually helps you refine something on your side. So fundamentally, making it available to you guys is part of hopefully improving engagement in the performance assurance process. And part of that engagement will naturally be, we don't think that data quite looks right. Can we get into the detail of it with you? If you do see something like that, then the best thing to do is to raise a ticket via the help desk. That'll get routed to performance assurance, and then one of the team will obviously look to pick that up with the relevant person in your organisation. I would mention as well on the risk driver detailed tab in the dashboards, you can drill down to many of those down to a sort of meter point or other sort of transaction level. Just for your data, obviously, just you as a party can do that. So if you are sort of looking at it going, doesn't quite look right, want to marry it up with what we're saying, you do have that ability. Much of that data is by default pseudo-anonymized. So all the data we get from DTN, for example, is pseudo-anonymized. So if you do need to unanonymize that, which you would need to if you're doing that comparison, again, if you raise a ticket, we can work with you to do that. And if it's something you want to have permanently de-anonymized, we can enable that for you specifically. So, but by default, we don't unanonymize it. So that's available there. There will occasionally be things where obviously there's like timing differences. We've got that kind of strict cadence of a performance assurance month. So, for example, that erroneous switch measure we were talking about before, clearly the switches that form the population that we're counting the number of erroneous switches into are not necessarily the switches that included the one that was originally the erroneous switch, because that could have been the previous month or month before that or whatever it is. But we're not trying to measure that. What we're trying to do is get a level of kind of relative performance. So there may be the odd thing like that, but yeah, absolutely, please do. We do our best to check the data, and obviously we work with the source providers to try and make sure that the data we're using is the right thing to be looking at. But having sort of many tens, if not hundreds of users look at it is obviously going to help flush out any other things, and that is obviously in everybody's benefit to make sure we're all looking at the most accurate view of performance. Back on the other question, so the MAU will need to allocate the viewer role to any users in your organisation that need access to the dashboards, including the contract manager. Which is that. Thanks. Well, that's certainly my understanding. If I've misunderstood that, I will check with the Portal Auth team offline and confirm. But because there are a couple of roles that get kind of super privilege.
So to those left on the call, thank you for participating today. We do have a feedback survey on Slido, which you should see on your phones if you've joined us on Slido. And please feel free to submit any feedback that you may have. Other than that, I hope you have a good Friday and enjoy your weekend. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks,
guys. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.